Hello everybody, this is Supply Jam and this is going to be an in-depth guide into regimes, what works best and how to organise them, needs, what affects them and how to keep them under control, and programs, planning them, what you need for them to work and their benefits. I'll help you master these three things and in turn your prison will run smoothly. So we're going to start with regimes, ladies and gents, and go over the 24-hour cycle of your prison and ultimately what a good balance of activities should be to fulfill your prisoners' needs. You've got your sleep, and really 6 hours of sleep is all they really need. You've got free time, which they need plenty of. I'd say at least 8 hours and at multiple points throughout the day. Your prisoners need to eat, and I'd say 2 to 3 slots throughout the day and between 1 to 2 hours, so they all got time to reach the canteen and everybody gets to eat. Prisoners have work time, which should be around 4 hours, again so they can reach their station and get a reasonable amount of work done. There is the shower activity, which if I'm honest, you don't really need, as you can build showers in their cells and they get this done in free time. This means more time for anything else that you want. And lastly, you've got your lockup activity, which really is useful for concluding your prisoner's day or concluding work for the day. I tend to only use these two as they follow on nicely to end of task or end of day where all your prisoners will return to their cells. Now, this regime is good if you have only one kind of prisoner. However, this is also very limited, rigid, and doesn't give you a lot of flexibility. But to change that, you can split the regime by security level and have different security levels with completely different regimes. So something like this. You've got minimum and medium, who've got their own timetable. Then you got maximum with a completely separate work schedule, which you need in the shop, for example, otherwise nobody would be free to buy anything. So it's a huge benefit to have your regime this way, especially if you want to keep a separation between the different security levels. Now, let's move on to needs. So I'm going to go through all the individual needs step by step, with the exception of these, as these are your basic, straightforward needs. And providing that you have these items in working order, then you shouldn't have a problem really keeping these in check. So first you've got safety. Now this pretty much is as it sounds, is how safe is your prison. So have you got lots of incidents like this where prisoners are running riot, they're going crazy, causing fights, there's loads of deaths? This is going to raise your safety up and basically give prisoners the impression that you're not a safe prison. This will cause more problems, this will cause more fights, and this will ultimately cause more deaths, which you don't need because it lowers your financial rating and it's not good for your prison. To put more guards in, you want to get armed guards if it's really starting to get too much of a problem. You want to make sure that you're all over your solitary confinement, making sure that these guys are being punished for their actions and keeping on top of it. Another good thing would be to get tasers as soon as you possibly can, as this really does eliminate the problems early, and get your dogs involved as well, because another thing that can be a problem is contraband, so you really want to lower that down as well. Next up, we've got recreation and comfort. Again, the comfort part sounds pretty straightforward, is how comfortable are your prisoners? Do they have enough things to do? in their free time? Do they have a yard that's big enough with lots of items to use? Is their common room big? Do they have things like a pool table? Do they have things like arcade, TVs, all these kind of things? Also computers as well. You know, do they have all the niceties that they need to be able to relax? And recreation part of it isn't necessarily doing things like arts and crafts and things like that. Recreation can be a meaningful job. So are your prisoners working? Do they have a fulfilling job that keeps them occupied? You know, that's always another thing. And lastly, you want to make sure that in terms of comfort, that your rooms are literally as high rating as possible, which you can see here. The more nice items that you have will show up in green, and that is what you want. And you're going to get a rating out of 10. So the higher it is, the more comfortable your prisoners will be in that room. Get them as high as possible because it really does count. Next up, you've got environment. So you can ask the question, what does it mean by environment? Well, it just means environment that they're in. Is it clean? Is it tidy? Is there lots of mess everywhere? So if it's a messy prison, that is going to make a massive problem. Make sure you've got loads of cleaners on hand that are going to be able to pick all the pieces up, you know, and gardeners as well, because they also play a part in keeping your prison tidy from the outside. So make sure you've got enough of them as well, keeping your prison outside tidy. You've got privacy next. So privacy is, again, another one that's fairly straightforward and easy to achieve. You know, make sure your prisoners have their own cells. If they're sharing a cell with somebody else, they're going to get the and that's going to impact their privacy. If they've got showers in their own cells, again, that adds to privacy. If they're having to share a shower with other people, that's not going to help them out. So the more stuff you can give them in private areas, like their cell, the much better prison you'll have, and this won't be an issue. Next, you've got freedom. So, how much freedom are you giving your prisoners? That is really what's important. So, like I said earlier in the regime part, you know, the more free time is better. You need to give them plenty of free time. Otherwise, they're not going to get the freedoms and they're not going to be happy, and they're just going to cause problems. Try to avoid lockdowns where possible, like putting them in lockdown or things like that, because that will impact their freedoms. You give them as much freedom as possible, they're happy. Next up, clothing. Right, again, you need to make sure your prisoners are clothed. The one thing you need to make sure is that you've got a laundrette or a laundry room. So this can be done by the cleaners, or you can have prisoners do it as well. And you just want to make sure that all your cleaning and all your laundry's done and your prisoners got clean clothes. This won't be an issue. That's all that there is to it for that one. Then you've got your drugs, alcohol, and spirituality. Now, these ones are quite a bit difficult to manage. So you need to make sure that you've got programs in place to prevent these guys from becoming too much of a problem. So alcoholics awareness, drug, pharmaceutical courses, things like that, and spirituality. So if you've got these set up and you've got enough of them set up where your prisoners can go to these different programs with your psychologist, in your infirmary, in your chapel, this is really important, and this will lower this down. Potentially it won't get rid of it, because I think it's something that will always be an issue in a prison, but you can minimize it as much as possible by giving them more programs like these, and you should be able to reduce it down. Literature is the next one. Not too much is really needed to get this one done. Really, if you've got a library in place with workers in there, that should cover a large sum of it off. And only other thing really is that if there is plenty of bookshelves, potentially have them in their rooms, and then you can avoid a lot of problems there. and that should absolutely eradicate literature altogether. So you should never really have an issue with literature. And lastly, we've got luxuries. This is probably the biggest problem you'll have. And it's controversial. You've got all these different types of contraband and luxuries hiding around in your prison that your prisoners will steal. They will steal them, and they will consistently shift them, chop them, change them, and they will go all over the place. And there'll always be a demand for them, regardless of however much you try. The only real way you can balance it is by having a shop, a working shop in place where your prisoners can buy luxuries with the money they've earned from jobs. This is probably the best way to try and diminish it, although again, it's not the easiest one to get rid of. Let's move on to the last section, and we're going to move on to programs. So these are really important to have. I mentioned in a couple of the needs sections about programs, as these really do improve your prison a lot, and this definitely gives your prisoners opportunities to do different things. So get jobs, tackle alcohol related issues, tackle drug abuse, get in touch with God. All these random bits that they need is available. You can scroll down to any program you want. You would just press start, and then you'd scroll up, and then you would see that there is a slot that has been opened for alcoholic group therapy, or you can edit it in the scheduler here. Now, this is a lot more effective if you've got multiple work slots for different prisoners, like we mentioned before in Regime. So you'd have two different sets of slots which are in green, and they would be your different work slots. You can move these around. You can create more just by clicking on the empty spaces, providing that there is enough blocks for them to fit in. So for instance, the pharmaceutical one is 1 square, the alcoholic group therapy is 2, the kitchen's 2, but you can get some that are 3 or more. And then you can see if we've selected some that we don't have available, that it will just display the reason why. And in this instance, we don't have a room. But there is loads to choose from in this, and it has two benefits. One, it impacts your finance, because the programs will then lead to things like jobs, will lead to things like reform. And reform is important because you want your prisoners to basically have a less reoffending rate. The less reoffending rate, the more likely they are to be released. And if they're released, then happy days, you get a nice hefty bonus out of it. But if you have a high reoffending rate and these guys come back, you get fined. So that's why programs are really important. And that's it for this video, guys. Don't forget to give us a like and a subscribe. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching, guys, and I hope to see you again in the next video.